that's all of us.
which is team one's, do you know your team number?
16423.
Is it 16423?
It is.
Yeah.
I was gonna guess 416, but,
Oh, that would
and
be
if you'd
nice.
like, if anybody wants another team, then there's a couple spots available all of a sudden this morning.
That'd be fun.
So, alright, so this was a talk, but because I got one team, I'll probably digress and cover a few different things. Last week, Emily and some of the other people were there, we did a little bit of, some workshops and stuff, so we'll talk a little bit what it's gonna do. The first part of this, I just put in, a general slide on what FTC is, because a lot of this was supposed to be for team management, for starting the season. So it can be middle or high school, all right? It is that third tier of first, so the third tier of all the first between FLL Junior, FLL, FTC, and FRC. And I think Mr. Hobbins would have covered that in the previous presentation that we were going to be here. So I don't know how big your team is. It can be anywhere from 2, okay, to 10, and I think the actual overall limit is 16 people that you can put together and work with, but a minimum of 2. The playing field is a 12 by 12 field, so you've got a playing field now. I don't know if you got any game pieces for
I
it.
got that too.
Did you get some?
We did.
Excellent. There'll be another field in Hamilton at the Catholic Education Center.
Oh, is that where it's gonna go?
Yeah, so I just set that one aside for them, so that way we can try to probably set up some local scrimmages, so that you can practice and so on, all right? So you're gonna develop a strategy, design and build sophisticated robots, and you're gonna use a modular kit of parts. When you do go to compete, there's 2 teams on an alliance. In FRC, there's 3. Here, there will be 2 teams on an alliance, okay? So the matches go a little bit quicker, but there are a few fundamental differences that we can talk about. You do get a kit of parts. Every team in Ontario got the same kit of parts, which is this one, okay, which is from Tetrix. Last week I did give away a Rev kit of parts to somebody. Why did we choose this kit of parts? Because they helped to finance it a little bit, so we saved everybody a little bit of money. It also helps me because I've got everybody the same as they're going to go through. When we talk about the rules, we'll talk a little bit more about that kit of parts and what you cannot use. So overall view, head to head, okay, design and build the robot. It is a reusable platform powered by Android technology. So in your case and in Ontario, you will have your 2 Android phones. I asked last week who set their Android phones up already. Was it fun?
It was not.
Exactly. So you gotta just follow the steps. The first thing you would have had to do with your Android phones would be to remove the SIM cards. And it doesn't say that anywhere, unfortunately. So people try to configure their phones with the SIM cards in them from that package so that they're gonna go through there, all right? There's many awards for the competition, community outreach and design, and just like with the FRC, you can apply for over $80 million worth of scholarships. That said, because it's the first year, there's a lot of grants that are not there or not limited yet, but we are trying to build those for the future to help out different teams. There was a grant if you sign up a team, a new team, you could get almost a $500 credit to get a kit of parts, but we already discounted the kit of parts for every team. So what we did in Ontario was we actually, rather than have one team get a grant, we sort of spread the wealth out to all 30 teams as we did this year. What do you need for a team? You need 2 or more adult mentors. I don't know how many you have. Do you have 2 now?
Plus, yeah.
Okay. They have to be willing, motivated, and ready to coach. And you can have volunteers as well, just like any other team. You should have a meeting place, and I'll talk a bit about that. And you're going to build a robot probably about the size of a microwave oven. Okay. The size limitation on the robot is 18 by 18 by 18. Okay. However, it can expand out larger. That said, for this year's game, if you build a robot greater than 14.385 inches, it will not go under your side of the sky bridge. Right? So there's a lot of different things we can talk about on your strategies to do that when you're going to go through it. You should have a budget and a fundraising plan and a desired you don't, then why we're here. Okay? Your season, so this season's a little bit different, but I'll talk a little bit about the season overall in case you do continue on next year. You've got a kit of parts, it would only be the registration fee for you. So generally they kick off in June. So a lot of teams get ready in June when game manual part 1 gets finalized a little bit. And that's basically when registration opens up. Kickoff in early September. You watch the kickoff so you understand. And the design and build season usually runs from September to the end of October. So usually 2 months, that's it. Okay. We're stretching it out as we go through, and the reason is that in a regular event year, tournaments would start or can start in October and will continue through April. Okay. In our case, it's going to be just one event in January, right? And then you will qualify to go to Detroit in April. Okay. The way it actually works is that as the competition grows, there'll be what's called leagues created. So in those leagues, you will have a league competition. So an event generally takes 1 day, that's it, and it's over with. And you will gain points in your league, okay? So if your school board wanted to have 100 teams, which would be great, we'd all love it, you could have your own league, right? You'd all compete together and then qualify or gain points to go out. And you'll get more information on that. You will also get a scrimmage schedule. So I'm meeting a couple schools next week. And what will happen is we'll just do scrimmages, practices, so that people can come out and do that. If you want to host one, then feel free. Okay. Before you got a field, you should have said that to me, because I think we were discussing spreading fields around for free to people that wanted to host scrimmages.
He donated it?
Mr. Armstrong donated it.
It's 12 by 12, right?
Yeah.
So it's fine. Yeah, there's no problem if you've got game pieces. But I just wanted to give you an overall indication. Just so you know, I'm in Edmonton middle of October, and then we're flying, or we're going to go down to Calgary the Friday night for their first event.
Okay.
So they're practiced at it. They're going to run that season out. They're going to start events in October. Out west, and if you do want to run an event, here's just an idea, and I passed this on to First. They run all their events generally in 2 days. The reason they do that is they have a large geographical area that people have to get into. They realize that not a lot of the teams have had a lot of experience or a lot of practice at their schools. So they'll run a Saturday and just let them practice and train and work on the court, and then they'll have the event on the Sunday, right? So that they can see as they go through. All right. Time commitment, mid-September, after school sport. I would suggest that you could take this using the new robotics curriculum and actually create a course and put it all into the classroom. Right? And there's multiple ways to do that. I showed you some modularization that I'm doing now. So we won't worry too much about the time commitment. Okay. So the first steps for the season, we're going to talk about your season, is get an idea of the engineering process. Okay. The whole identify, think, design, build, test, repeat. Right? I can't stress this enough, because I have engineers that work for me. I am an engineer, and I can tell you right now that everybody goes to this part and this part, and then back to this part and this part and this part. It's just the way it works out. All right? The first thing I would say, though, is number one, come up with a plan that fits your team. And I talked about this to teams last week, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. Look at your team, look at what you can do, and just come up with a simple plan. The second part is to understand the basics of Game Manual Part 1. And I'll talk a little bit more about Game Manual Part 1 in a minute, so that you can see it. All right? A couple of resources for you. All right? Number one, if you go to FTC website, okay, there is tons of resources that are going to be there. The Game Manual Part 1 will be there for you, and after kickoff, Game Manual Part 2. You've all downloaded it and memorized it. Did anybody do the rules quiz? There's 300 questions or something on the rules quiz.
There's a lot.
Paul told me.
Yeah, you put a lot on there.
I would have failed. Okay? So that you can sit. So what I would do, the first thing that I would do is I would get together and I would talk about the hardware that you've got. Right? So the first thing that you've got in an FTC kit is the hardware kit. Okay? You have a kit of parts. this presentation, I'm not gonna cover my tips and tricks that I did last week on assembly and how things should go together. I put it on that USB stick and you've probably all got it, so you've got it, okay?
I
But-
have a USB stick I've shipped already. So.
Alright. But get familiar with it. As part of Game Manual Part 1, remember that it will list what hardware you can and what hardware you cannot use. Because you are starting with a kit of parts, but you are not limited to the kit of parts. You can design your own parts, 3D print your own parts, make your own parts. There are just some rule restrictions, and I'll use the one that any device that you buy must only have 1 degree of freedom. So you could buy a slide that goes in and out, but you couldn't buy a slide that goes in and out and this way at the same time. You would have to design or make that, right? You have something called the expansion hub, which we have on this robot right here, okay? The expansion hub adds the I/O and the motor control, okay, for your system. This is what is legal for first this year, is the expansion hub. There is also something called the control hub. So if you're serious about taking this on, you might want to look at getting a control hub. It's being tested in both California and Texas this year. The difference being is that the control hub actually takes the place of one of the Android phones. Okay, so it's running the Android operating system on it already, so you can do away with having that phone on your extra robot. Better be your mom. Okay, so that is the expansion hub. Okay, there's a couple of technical things about the expansion hub that I'll just cover with you. You have all your I/O on one side and your power. Okay, you have your motor control on one side. Now, expansion hub, all the I/O for sensors on this are 3.3 volts. Okay, so a lot of sensors, a lot of motors. In this case, you have Tetrix Tornado motors. The encoders in here are 5 volts. Okay? So what you need to convert from 5 volts to 3.3 volts to plug them in, and you should have had some in your kit. You don't have it because I found some that went from the manufacturer that didn't. Is you can look at this one later. You'll see these little boards called logic level converters. Right? All of the sensor I/O here is also 3.3 volts. So the sensors that you get in your kit, such as the touch sensor you should have and a color sensor, you get one of each, okay? These are 3.3 volts, the ones from Red. But if you're using other sensors and they're 5 volts, such as maybe you have an ultrasonic sensor, okay, you will have to use a logic level converter as well to bring that down to 3.3 volts. There's all sorts of cable adapters and so on. That also can make things messy because you have different adapters and so on. So I do tell people that in FTC, you are allowed to replace any of the wiring adapters with anything that you want. So if you want to modify the cables and make them all the same, you can do that. There's no problem whatsoever. And a lot of teams will look at that and will do it. There's a couple notes in some of the other presentations too that I gave that talk about the ports. So if you take a look at your I/O, for instance, for your digital, you'll see that there's a port here that says 0, 1 and a port that says 2, 3, but there's only one plug-in. So if you need to get 2 I/O out of one port, you have to have a Y adapter cable. Okay. So there should be a couple of Y adapter cables in your cable conversion kit so that you've got them. The other thing here is to talk about the I2C bus. Okay. So there is a built-in integrated motion unit in here, Bosch accelerometer gyroscope, right? That you can use. That uses I2C channel 0 already. So even though this says, when you look at it on your I2C that you got the 2 channels, the first one is already used by the internal one. If you're going to use separate I2C sensors on the I2C bus, then you can define an extra port. I'll talk a little bit more about setting those up and defining them later. Did you set up a config file on your phone already?
Okay.
Okay, so we'll talk about that for you so that you can understand what's going on it, all right? There is a USB connector on the side of the port. That's where you're going to plug in the adapter that we will plug into our cell phone, okay, for our RC or robot controller cell I put some 3D print files on there. They'll probably look really good on your 3D printer, because on mine they lifted. Yeah. And there are things for phone holders and stuff like that, so, okay, so that you want to put it there. Right? You need to remember that, and I'm going to cover it, we'll talk a little bit about the wiring and so on as we go through. You have the command and control mechanism. So the command and control mechanism is going to consist of two phones, okay? And you're going to have to name your phones correctly according to your team number, all right? So if I take a look at this phone here, it's dark, it says 1241-C-RC. So this is team 1241, this is their C robot, and this is their robot controller. And I labeled mine because I mixed them up. You can see how easy it is to mix up, because this one is 1241-C, and this one, oh, it's 1241-C too. I must have fixed it, because yesterday one was D and one was C, okay? So your remote driver control station, driver station, and your robot control station, right? So did you rename your phones and go through the whole procedure with ... Okay, so make sure they're named right. Couple things about the phones when you do set them up is when you're in that configuration, you want to make sure that you disable the sleep on wireless. All right? And I can go in here and show you how to do it on a phone if you want a little bit. But the reason is remember you're connecting to these phones via direct wireless connection. If they're sitting for a while, they'll go into sleep mode, and then you won't be able to reconnect to the phone, which will be a disaster, because when is it going to go into sleep mode? 2 minutes before you're supposed to start your competition. And there'll be a plethora of cables so that you can put your joysticks onto your phone stations and so on. And I have this cool table that mine sit on, so 2 joysticks in the phone that you can design and put things together with. You also have your programming options. There are 3 programming options. Yeah. There is Java blocks, which is the block-based programming language written for first, and there is OnBot Java. Those 2 programming languages run on the cell phone itself. You can actually code on the cell phone if you wish. All right? They do not require any special hardware to connect to the phone or the device. So we could use an Android tablet, we could use anything with a Java-enabled browser. We could use a Chromebook that costs $100 in order to connect to the thing. We don't have to load any software, all right? We then have the Android Studio, and to do that you have to download and install the Android Studio IDE, okay, in order to program in full Java. What are you going to program in?
We're doing Android Studio.
Okay, see, everybody jumps into Android Studio. The only thing I can tell people is that first recommends that all teams learn to program in blocks first, because then they can understand the structure and the terminology, rather than try to jump right into Android Studio. Especially your phone configurations, because you can screw them up real easy. Were you there last week?
I was not.
Okay, because somebody helped out a team on me last week, setting up their phones from inside of Android Studio, and just screwed up all their phones. So I had to wipe them all out and start again. Right? It's up to you, it's up to what you're familiar with. Right? All I know is that I have 2 Java high school students at my office right now who came in to me and said that they knew how to program in Java. And I said, great, you're going to install Android Studio. I want you to set this up, and I want you to go through the first steps on how to program the robot for me. They said they already knew Java, and I want you to do it for your teacher so that you're going to go back and give him a presentation on it. And they couldn't figure it out. So there's Java for HTML, and then there's Java. That's all I tell people. Right? But it's your choice, and it depends on the budget. Okay. Typical FTC timeline, pre-season. You guys jumped in now. So this is what you would probably do in pre-season, is get your budget, talk about your marketing tools, recruit or pick or cajole your team members, apply for some grants, register, and attend workshops and demos, okay? I don't have a listing of the events right now. There will be weekly webinars. So one of the things as an example that we are looking at doing, and I have to finish it off, is with your Skystones this year, you have your your sky stones, you have your stones, and you have your other images that you must recognize. Some people are going to try to do that with their color sensor, okay? I'm not sure how that's quite gonna work out because this color sensor actually tries to read color as opposed to voltage. So maybe we could read the voltage out of it and say if it's yellow, we're gonna get this much volts in the 3.3, and if it's a different color, we're gonna get this many volts. You also have both Google TensorFlow Vision machine learning technology, all right? And you have Euphoria Vision technology. We're gonna do a little webinar on the TensorFlow for people, and we're probably gonna do it using the camera right off the cell phone, right? Rather than put a secondary camera on to try to differentiate those sky stones for people. Am I going to do that right now in the first 2 months of build season or a month? Absolutely not, right? Because we need to focus on 1 or 2 tasks first that we know that we can do well. One of the problems I also have with that is I think about it, I'm gonna have to mount, right, my camera on the front of the robot. I gotta make sure I can control the cables because it has to be at the right height as opposed to using a USB webcam. Okay. So a lot of different options so that you can look at it and do it. Kickoff is September, we had that, it was great fun. All right, and then you get build and scrimmage season. So this is just if you're gonna do some planning on what you should do right after kickoff and to make your plans. Make sure you're familiar with the game manuals, like I said, and talk to other teams about scrimmages. That's the best thing that you can do. All right. Okay, tournament season, provincial championships. Guess what? Everyone in Ontario has qualified for the provincial championships. Way to go. See that? That's good. All right. And I have no idea. Does anyone know what they're charging?
No.
I have no
They
idea.
have, like,
Maybe there's no registration fee
I
this
don't think
year.
there is.
Excellent. Typically an event is like $100.
Oh, it's not too bad.
Worlds are probably the registration fee, but.
Worlds, I would think there's always a registration fee.
And that's in Detroit, you said?
Yeah, in Detroit.
And you qualify.
Yeah. Stay in Canada. Take the bus across, it's $5. So there, all right? And you'll get an invitation. I believe that out of the, hello Annika. Annika,
Talk to me.
question for you. Out of the 32 teams that we're gonna have at Durham College, even
Yeah.
though we're down to 28, is it 6 that get to qualify to go to Detroit?
I heard
It was
one.
2.
It was one. They changed it.
So we got 6, 2, and 1.
I'm really correctly announced the other day it was one. The only person who goes is the American Inspire Award.
I'm working on that.
And then I emailed
Let me
Dave.
find out with you in the next 5 minutes. I'll be right back.
All right, I'm working on that.
Dave
Okay.
emailed me and said it was just one, so.
I heard one the other day as I went through. All right, so your storage space needs. So you need a classroom about this size. You need countertops and tables. You need a 12 by 12 court area on the ground to serve as a field, which you're telling me is an issue.
Oh, it's not an issue, it's in the learning commons in the library.
Yeah.
That's where it's going.
Is it?
That is actually a pretty good idea because I have actually a whole series of teams from Northern Ontario right now, and it's all in their learning commons because they don't have learning commons anymore. They closed them all, took out all the books, and turned them into robotics labs, maker spaces.
You serious?
Seriously?
Absolutely, yes.
How far up north?
We start along North and North Bay, so Kirkland Lake.
Really?
Yeah, they closed them all on District School Board 1. There's no more libraries. And they're beautiful spaces.
I bet they're amazing.
Because they're all in the front of the school, they're all glassed in, but that's exactly what it does. It also gives them the ability, because it's in a learning commons, it's not, for instance, in a tech
Yeah, I
department
know.
or in a science department, that those teachers, from a teaching standpoint, don't have to have the AB qualifications.
Yeah, I
to be
know.
in the classroom.
And there's also more funding available.
Yes, exactly. So that's what they've done. You need a storage cabinet for a couple of things that you should be able to lock. You're gonna have robot kits, you're gonna have parts, all right? And the nice thing about it is that parts can go through there. There's 2 things about parts I think I told people last week, if I remember correctly. Number 1 was, we were talking about gear ratios and I picked something, but I remember that I did tell them that if you find a photocopier, take it apart. Because photocopiers have more gear ratios in them and more good quality parts for gearing. Oh, and the other thing I told them to take apart was if you have an old 3D printer, take it apart. Because it's got lead screws, stepper motors, and drive motors. Did you get the
And the
answer?
winner is, drum roll please, not that it's the winning, it's the earning.
One.
Emily.
I'm gonna fix that.
I know, I know he told you, thank you so much for holding strong to your
Convictions?
convictions.
Excellent.
Now we are all convinced that you are correct, as you knew already.
Or that she's the only one that pays attention?
That's you.
It's good.
Probably.
Okay. Costs. So, you're gonna work out your budget right now. So your team registration every year is $375 Canadian, $275 US. I apologize, at the current exchange rate, it actually works out to $371.84 if paying with Visa or MasterCard. If you pay with Amex, you pay a greater exchange rate and therefore it goes up. So $375, okay? Control and communications set is about $305. The electronics module and sensor set is about $175, and the competition set is about $650. Okay? That is for you to get one kit to start with, because the pricing is subsidized. Right? So just to give you an example on a budget to increase that expansion hub, you're paying $129 US when you order it in your kit of parts. But to buy it separately now, it is 175 units with no cables. Okay? The biggest cost for Canadian teams is cell phones, because these are, you can use Sony Xperias, ZTEs have worked. These are Motorola G4s and Motorola G5s. Okay? That, I tell people that I have actually just bought 380 refurbished Motorola cell phones, okay, at $83 each, as opposed to $300 each, to try to get that cost down. I don't think at this point in time that you're looking at a classroom set because it's your first year. I have teams that have 10 or 12 robots out west now because they've set up. Probably just broke that one. Get that one on film. For that. So just to give you an idea of your costs so that you can see it. Did I break it?
Nope.
All right. Okay. All right.
Maybe just stop thing yet.
Tools. I put together this list on a basic tool list. I said about $350. I know you guys have all this, so you're good when you're going to work through it. Okay. Electronics. If you don't have a computer, you need to get a computer, a laptop. I do recommend you have a power bar, some extra batteries, because you only have one extra battery, or you should only have one battery right now, okay? So, one thing about the batteries is that when you go to competition, okay, you must use, this is not an actual real battery, this is one of the two competition batteries. So one is the one that you have, which is the Pittsco one that's a little big and squarer than this one. This is a mini one because it's easier for me to fly with. All right, and they'll look at this battery to make sure that it's correct. The other one is a Rev Slimline battery. They'll look at that battery to make sure it's correct as well. It has a 10 amp fuse in it. You shouldn't, or 20 amp fuse in it, sorry. You shouldn't modify the fuse. The one thing I do tell people, and I said this last week, is it says the fuses are just standard automotive fuses. You can buy them at Canadian Tire. You can get 5 fuses in a pack for $4.95. I was honest last week. I said, you can go on my website and I will sell you a fuse for $7. Okay? So, I don't think it's that much, because I think I pay 41 cents or something US each. But you can get them at Canadian Tire, all right? There's no problem when you're going to blow them. And you're not allowed to defeat the fuse, right? You are allowed to power and test your robot with other batteries as well, right? So if you've got other batteries, you can wire them in there. I just bought 5,000 batteries, okay, that I'm having manufactured right now. You could use those, and trust me, they're not going to be as expensive as these ones. But you cannot use them for competition, right? Your battery charger that you've got, just so that you are aware, there was a card in the box of your battery, I hope, or a piece of paper. Did anybody read it? No.
I think I'm going to that, so I don't know.
Battery charger has 2 settings on it. It's got a 0.9 amp and it's got a 1.6 amp, okay? Charge your batteries on 0.9 amps only. Right? Otherwise, you will decrease the life of the battery. The 1.8 is there if you're in a real hurry and have a panic problem, but it will definitely decrease the life of your battery. The batteries will charge anywhere between 13.85 volts and 14.1 volts, even though they are a 12 volt battery. And if they're under 10 volts, you won't drive anything correctly. So there's your little tips and tricks on your batteries so that you can see them. Okay. A couple of other cost estimates, game pieces, more spare batteries, and everything like that. And if you are interested, I sent this to First last week because they asked me. I did create a budget worksheet, okay, for both minimum budget and maximum budget. Right? So my maximum budget, I think I worked out to $8,500.
That's with travel and everything?
That's with buying a 3D printer,
Oh,
everything. You already have a 3D printer, for instance, so yes, all right. So we estimate $2,200 to $2,800, all right, from a budget standpoint. Couple things about to learn the basics. So the FTC website's got a ton of stuff on it. I'm going to cover that as we go through. There's stuff called the FTC Toolbox, which has a lot of documentation in it, so that you can see that. And there's some stuff on YouTube, which is really, really good. I watched a video last night. I think I embedded it in here. One of the teams in California had written a great tutorial on teleoperation drive with four-wheel drive mechanical wheel system for your robots, right? Which may or may not be a bad idea for this challenge, because you can shift sideways. All right. That said, a holomic drive, we talked about this last week, and I want to see somebody try to create a three-wheel holomic drive for this competition challenge. Okay. And connect with the FIRST community. You're not alone. If you got a question, ask. We'll get you in touch with somebody. Okay. And remember, the first tenet of is work properly with FIRST. Okay. All right. There's a reason that this conference is called the 2056 Inspire Conference.
Ways to inspire.
Ways to inspire. Why is the word inspire in the name?
To inspire other teams.
to get them involved, to get them going, to look for guidance.
Because they want to win the Inspire Award. No,
Oh,
I'm just
I forgot about that.
We don't have the Inspire Award.
kidding. I know. No, it's pretty good. There's a lot of teams will do this and put up conferences, which is what I like. I tell people that I do robotics competitions all over the world. Okay? Some of them are so cutthroat, it's not funny. And the one thing that I like about FIRST is that there is that willingness to help other teams. I just came from spending a week in Russia, and the team from Jamaica could barely get their robot to move, and not one of the other teams would help them.
Seriously?
Not seriously. First, because it's high stakes there. It's like the Olympics. A team that wins, those students will get scholarships worth $500,000, right? So they don't want to help anybody. You do have the FIRST resource library if you haven't been there. That's a screen capture from last night, okay? So firstinspires.org, resource library, FTC, team management. Don't write it down, we'll give you the presentation. The link is hot. But you'll see it talks about mentor training, your budget, how to do fundraising, all sorts of wonderful things that you can do. So you have that. You will have your mentor manual. Have you read your mentor manual?
Most.
Good man. Game manual part 1 and game manual part 2. The robot wiring guide, the FTC form, and Emily, guess what they called me about last night at 7 o'clock? My printing that was supposed to be ready for last week. So this would be your push button guide right here on really nice paper, so you guys can have a couple of those too, just so that you have it.
I think it's the one that they built the other day.
Yes, it probably is, right? So your mentor manual will give you all this, right? Season planning tool, team meetings, registration, builds, judging awards, how to do community outreach, all right? This is not my community outreach talk. But it's very, very important that you do your community outreach, right? I told one of the girls that works for me the other day that, because she was talking about a lady, a teacher, complaining to her again, and I said, so I heard that story about 5 years ago, and then she went to the bank, And she was in line at the bank complaining about the fact that she needed this program and had no funding. And the guy behind her in line happened to be the president of the local United Way chapter. Boom, she had her funding, right? So, you know, there's a lot of people. I used to give a talk at the Optimist Club. Any of the Optimist Club?
Friends of mine are.
So the Optimist Club, believe it or not, has an educational program and have funding available for it, for exactly for things like this. If you live where I am, it's 4-H. So you have Game Manual Part 1, which has your rules and definitions, okay, mechanical, electrical, and software. So there are, like I said, things you cannot use on your robot. They will be in Game Manual Part 1. Certain wheels. I don't have high grip wheels here, I had them last week. We can't use what's called a high grip wheel because it'll tear up the cord. Alright, so we can use different types of wheels, different types of motors. I just got a guy yesterday called me and I don't know what he's doing because he's using different motors with different hubs, with different this. It's a recipe for disaster, but they want to do it. So that's the thing. And then you have your game manual, which is your rules and your scoring for the games. I will say one thing about scoring in FTC, and I believe Karthik covered this in his presentation last week. In FTC, over 50% of your scoring can come from autonomous mode. Because in FTC, game pieces moved in autonomous are worth more than they are in teleoperation. Whereas in FRC, correct me if I'm wrong, they're worth the same.
Depends on the year.
Depends on the year, yes.
Power up, it was twice the amount.
Right.
It really depends. Also, ours is 30 seconds, FRC is 15 seconds.
Right. Your autonomous is also 30 seconds at the top, so I think we worked it out. You could score up to 72 points in autonomous. All right? That said, think about what you want to do in autonomous and think about what your robot can do. Right? Robot wiring guide is there. So your robot wiring guide will give you management tips and tricks and detailed instructions. So the nice thing about wiring up an FTC robot is the wiring guide will cover everything. And everything is generally plug and play into the system, right? The only other thing you might want to distribute are maybe some of the XT30 power. So there's distributions for that. And if you're going to use a lot of servos, there's servo power modules. The servo power modules will bump the voltage from 3.3 volts to 6 volts. So you get a little more oomph out of your servo motors. Right, so you can see it. So you get the wiring guide and you get the forms. Right? I don't think that's live. No, it's not. Okay. So the forms are there, they're great. You can ask lots of questions. There's the official form, okay, and then there's the two unofficial. So Chief Delphi has a form. You just got to get in there and search. The FRC teams are all over Chief Delphi so they understand it. And there's a Reddit form, okay? Monitored by Serena Williams. No, I'm just kidding. She's married to the guy who owns her, right? I think so, yeah. So that one has a lot of stuff. That was the tutorial I was looking at last night, actually. And that's the one on using Java blocks to do a Mecanum drive robot. Did a great job, the student did. Right? Some important tips. Read both game manuals. You can't play if you don't know the rules, right? Second one, build within your limits. So what experience do you have? How much time do you have? Okay? And can you afford it? Alright? The guys last night from me ordered a $189 set of Mecanum wheels. And they called them back and said, I can give you a better set of Mecanum wheels for $90. Just ask first rather than just go and buy stuff off a website. Okay? And I tell people that about my website at work all the time. I don't run it, I don't set the prices, the computer does it. So a lot of people think they spend less money on the internet, they don't. Okay? Build simple, and I would say do 1 or 2 tasks. So sit down right now within the game and decide on 2 tasks. So if one of your tasks is to push sky stones from this side to that side, push sky stones. If your other task is to push the, what's it called? Platform into the area, push the platform. Do 2 tasks, right? It's going to be kind of strange this year in Ontario because we have all rookie teams. But think about it, at another event, you may have other teams that can do those other tasks, and it just may work out that well for you. But if I have a team that can load and stack sky stones, and I can push sky stones for them, then that will be a pretty good alliance. So think about 1 or 2 tasks, do them and do them consistently, and document everything. I cannot tell you how much your engineering notebook in FTC is worth for points, but it is worth a lot of points. Okay? Set a schedule and stick to it. That's really funny. That's all I'm going to say. Some design considerations. All right? In your rookie year, make a few things, do it well. I just said that. You have an 18 by 18 frame. Don't immediately design your robot to be 18 inches by 18 inches. Because when you go to add stuff onto it, it's going to be bigger than 18 inches by 18 inches by 18 inches. So design your robot as small as you can. There are limitations with this one here. I can't get much smaller because I've got 4 motors on it. All right? But then again, if I make it too small, if I'm going to lift, I'll lose my center of gravity. Okay? Considering some form of defensive system on your robot. Okay? Because there's 3 other robots on the field and they will drive into you. Right? I used the analogy last week for FRC teams. I asked everybody there how long it takes a Rio and a radio to reboot. Do you remember?
I think it was like a minute or something.
45 seconds. Okay? 45 seconds. So I was in China in June and I had this team from Taiwan complaining that their radio was disconnecting all the time, that the radio was no good and the wireless was no good. And I thought, interesting. So I sat there for a half an hour, and every time that they lost connection, I timed it. 45 seconds, 45 seconds, 45 seconds. And what we found when we lifted over the robot like this was this, I'm not saying a bad thing, but I relate it to my wife's hair, okay? Because she has very curly hair. It just went everywhere. And in that, there was a little wire connection that had a little short wire on it. And every time they went over a bump, it went like this and rebooted the robot. Okay? There was no way to troubleshoot that. Like, it was just a lot of wiring on that robot. So think about a defensive system, because someone's going to do that. Center of gravity. Make sure you got a good center of gravity, and please remember that if you design a lift system to move those sky stones, that when you lift up, the center of gravity of your robot is going to change. Okay? This presentation does not have the picture of the robot tilted over on its side that they tried to drive with the lift up. Okay? Speed versus torque, so understand your gear ratios. Right? Your motors right now are 60-to-1 gear ratio. The Torquenados that you have, you can switch those if you wish a couple of ways. So there's a 20-to-1 gearbox and a 40-to-1 gearbox out of that, okay, which will reduce the speed and give you more torque. Or you can do it externally with your gears. All right, and I won't get into all that when you're going to work with it. Keep it simple. I told the group last week you need to be able to repair anything in 45 seconds as well. Because it's going to break when the match starts. It's not going to break when you're in the pits hanging out. It's going to break when the match starts. So if I have a logic level converter here that goes, and it's currently zap strapped inside of this channel and bundled up in a bunch of other wire, probably I need to get at that. And if I have a whole mechanism on it, it's not going to be good. If I have to change that hub, I need to be able to change that hub. I need to be able to do it quickly. So it's going to affect your design. Some other tips and lessons. Practice driving a lot and have a drive team. Does anyone know why Team 2056 is so good?
The driver practices for 100 hours.
You are gold star. And I've only been doing FRC now